Hi, everybody. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the difference between genre and literary fiction. In this class, we're being tasked with writing literary fiction, but most of us are probably more familiar with what is termed genre fiction, so we'll start there today. Genre fiction is, I guess, what is most commonly referred to as popular literature, popular fiction. It's the kind of stuff that you'll find in your supermarket and on the main floor of like a Barnes and Noble. Their genre fiction is going to be stories like this: The Perfect Lover, trashy romance novels, romance, fantasy, detective novels, the Harry Potter series, those kind of stuff. Even something like this, Moriarty, which if you have not read this book, you definitely should. It's amazing. It's a take on Sherlock Holmes, which would be a detective novel. And then we have my absolute favorite book of all time, which has recently been made into an amazing show, Outlander. If you ever want to talk Outlander, let me know. I can talk Outlander for days. What these different types of book have in common is what they fit into what we refer to as genre fiction. They are escapism. That's the crutch of what genre fiction is. We typically read it to escape, and the stories can be trying and terrifying and terribly sad. You don't have to have the guaranteed happy ending that's very common with like romance novels or with the Harry Potter series. But there is that sort of fantastical element. They can definitely be grounded in the real world, but it's more storytelling for the point of escape. The primary focus is the plot happens to the characters and the characters react to the action. So, for example, in a book like this, a trash romance novel, we have a man and a woman meet. They have some conflict, either internal or external. They get together and, have fun adult intimacy time. They have more conflict and then they have a happy ending. That's the formula for almost every single trash romance novel you will ever read. The characters are reacting to the events that happen to them. In this example that we have here, which is our detective novel, a crime happens, and then the detective has to go through a couple challenges to determine what happened, and is usually involved in a criminal activity against him, like he gets beaten up or kidnapped or tortured, and he ultimately discovers who the bad guy is, and he is, much like our trash romance couple, reacting to the actions that are happening to him. The same can be said for my favorite book of all time, Outlander. In that story, Claire gets sent back in time, meets up with Jamie, and stuff is continually happening to them, and they are reacting to the action. A genre story's plot is driven by the action. Okay, and that's what we're most familiar with. Almost every single TV show we watch, that's what's happening. So, in a nutshell, that's what genre fiction is. It's escapism. And the characters are reacting to the plot. All right. So, what is literary fiction? Literary fiction is often labeled as like highbrow fiction. It's going to be like the classics, and I have a couple examples here of those as well. For example, we've got the Great Gatsby, if I could speak, right? We have The Great Gatsby, by F. Scott Fitzgerald. We also have another example here of my favorite author ever, Ernest Hemingway, for Who the Bell Tolls. And then we have this tiny little lovely small itty bitty book here that you may be familiar with, 100 Years of the Best Short Stories. Okay. These are all examples of literary fiction, but what does showing you books, what good does showing books to you do? Is it all about the cover of the book? Is that what makes the difference between literary and genre? Not so much. When we talked about genre fiction, we talked quite a bit about how the plot is driven by the characters responding to the actions. The plot is driven by the action. In literary fiction, like For Whom the Bell Tolls, there may be action, there may be exciting bullfighting, there may be fishing tales, but the characters are not just responding to the action. Okay. In literary fiction, the plot is character driven. Things will happen to the character will respond, but the focus of the story is on the character development. If our character is in the middle of a battle in a piece of literary fiction, There's going to be some emphasis, of course, of the slash bang stabby battle fight that's going on, but there's also going to be a primary focus on how the character is experiencing the action within itself. So you're going to see a lot of self-reflection, a lot of emotional drive in literary fiction. You can have a literary piece where there's two characters just sitting across from each other in a bar and they're having a conversation, and that is the scope of the story, because what is driving the story is the conflict between them and within them. So yeah, that was a great explanation, wasn't it? So literary fiction is essentially focusing more on the characters as opposed to the action that is going on around the characters. The main difference is how the plot moves forward. I said that we can have a short story literary piece where the characters are just sitting in a bar having a conversation. In an example like that, the plot is all about the conflict that is going between the two characters. They might order a drink, they might get in a fight, but the focus is on that emotional development. That's the biggest difference between literary and genre fiction. In genre fiction, we have all sorts of stuff happening. And yes, we have strong emotional conflict, but the primary movement is the action. In a genre piece, that's in a genre piece. In a literary piece, the primary focus is on the character's development in response to what is happening. They're thinking, they're ruminating, they're growing as a character. And that is essentially the biggest difference between the two. What we want to do in this class is focus on literary fiction. But because we're doing that, we're not saying that genre fiction is bad. I will always be happy to tell you immediately that my favorite book ever is a trashy romance novel. I will read trashy romance novels long before I will ever pick up my Ernest Hemingway. One is not better than the other. It's just a different approach to storytelling. Sometimes when we'll read critiques and stuff, we'll hear like genre is being thrown around as negative or literary being thrown around as exclusive. It is not negative and it's not exclusive. It's just two different approaches to a writing style. So why do we even want to write literary fiction? Genre fiction is amazing. It's exciting. It's adventurous. It's escapism. Literary fiction is more hesitant to use this word, but it's a little bit more real. It's a little bit more in the experience, in the moment. There can be fantastical elements in literary fiction, but the focus is on the human experience and how we as humans experience conflict and grow from that conflict. And that conflict can just be emotional. It doesn't have to be the slash bang of a fight. We write literary fiction to explore human nature and the human experience. So why are we going to want to write literary fiction, especially if we're a genre writer? I've been upfront with this. I write trashy romance novel fiction. I also write a lot of literary short stories, and that's what mostly I publish is the literary short stories. But my preference is to write those formulaic trashy romance novels. So why do we even want to learn how to write literary fiction if we know we want to write genre stories? And the short answer is because focusing on literary fiction allows you to more deeply explore the human experience through internal conflict and character conflict. When we are focused less on the action, less on what is happening to or at our characters, we're able to dig deeper into them and explore the emotional connections and trauma and growth that is living the human experience. So writing literary fiction is just going to allow us to write better as genre writers and, frankly, vice versa. The biggest challenge with literary versus genre is the lines blur. We can have literary fiction that is very, very much like genre fiction. If you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, for example, it is technically classified as literary fiction because it's a work that is classic. But it's very fantastical. So it does have a lot of genre aspects to it. And one of the first stories we're going to look at, Refresh, shows how that line can be blurred. So if you look at a piece and you can't tell if it's strictly literary or genre, that is okay. It's probably got elements of both. Don't overthink the difference between literary and genre. When we're writing literary fiction, we're focusing more on the character and the character's development. rather than the action that is happening at them. And that's the biggest difference. If you have any questions at all, let me know. We can keep this conversation going in the discussion forums. We can talk about it through text, through chat. You can give me a call, or we can even Zoom about it if you want, whatever helps you feel comfortable and confident in the difference between literary and genre fiction.